Well, one of the intended activities of this summit is you have lots of opportunity to talk with one another, to meet those you may not know, and to reconnect with those you might. Uh, so I'm always a bit reluctant to cut things off, but we do have a program, and I can be a slave to the schedule at times. Uh, Next portion of our program is reflection remarks, and you might have been wondering when you looked at the schedule, why are we reflecting when we're only halfway through the first day? But the intent was to ask someone to reflect on the word responsible. As was suggested earlier, that there may be a lot of difference of perspective and opinion with regard to what that word means, and so I thought one thing that might be useful is to focus on that. So I've asked Mark Mendenhall from the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, and probably I will say the leading writer on global leadership in academic circles. Others might disagree, including Mark, but he is certainly the most cited in that field. So we're going to turn the time over to Mark. I've asked him to leave some time for question and discussion. And so without further ado, Mark.
Is this on? Okay. Well, I have to speak in this so they can record, right? Okay, I don't want to stand behind there if that's okay. Is there a clicker? Anyway, I'm not going to define the responsible and responsible global leadership. That's really for us to do today, or to try to do. But Alan asked me just to raise some issues as I've thought about it. And I'm going to call on a good friend and colleague, Gunther Stahl, in a few minutes to share some thoughts as well. I'm working with him and Christoph on some, is that ready to go? On this issue. And so a lot of this reflects their thoughts as well. So this is sort of a team effort, okay? Which means if you don't like it, you can also go talk to them afterwards. So as Alan said, I've been working a lot in global leadership, and they got me interested in this notion of responsible global leadership. And my first reaction was, why do you need responsible in front of global leadership? Wouldn't somehow that construct just subsume that idea? But I'm not really necessarily holding to that. So let's back up a minute, though. What is leadership to start with? I mean, I teach general leadership in the EMBA and MBA program where I'm at, and we spend about 6 hours just on this, because as all of you know, the empirical theoretical research on leadership cannot agree on what is leadership, right? So Gary Uckel, who kind of has written, his book is a good summary of the field. It comes out in multiple editions. Most people would agree with Gary that leadership involves something like that. Some would vehemently disagree, though. They would say leadership is not about one individual person. Leadership is actually a process. And then, there's very interesting stuff being done in shared leadership and things like that. I'm very tempted to kind of go off track here, but I won't. Okay, but again, most would agree that it has something to do with that. So one of the things that we're obviously doing today is looking at global leadership. Well, what's global? There's probably, if we really kind of ask each one of you to really unpack what you believe global is, I think we'd be surprised at the differences. Sebastian Reike and Alan and I and Joyce, we've taken a shot at this, and I'm not going to spend the time now to share with you, but we've kind of argued that global can be looked at on 3 dimensions: complexity, what we call presence, and flow. And within flow, there's a lot of focus on boundary spanning and stuff like that. So that looks like, we can send you these articles if you'd like, but one of the problems in the field is people mean different things by the term global. In fact, one of the things that led to this, and I'll try and do this very quickly, I think I was talking with Joyce, and we were talking about a specific case, kind of a scenario of an expatriate overseas doing this stuff. And I believe Joyce said something like, well, you know, that person's not really a global manager, they're an expatriate. And I got thinking, well, because of the nature of the work, I kind of think she's a global manager. So we got in this kind of interesting, not debate, but discussion of, well, why did you think they're a global manager and I didn't? And so this is sort of our initial attempts in the field to sort of flesh out the construct of global. And so if you have any questions, but that's not what we're here to do today, right? What's responsible in global leadership, okay? And all I want to do today in the time we have allotted is throw out some ideas that for us to really be pondering as we go forth the rest of the few days. And Alan, give me a sign when we need to do the discussion part. Okay. Now, Euclid has said the following just about the general leadership literature. It's a mess on this whole ethical leadership, okay? It's like we don't really know what it is. So, responsible or ethical global leadership fits right into this category. But the good news is the domestic and general people don't have anything on us yet because they're still messed up on this. So it brought to mind, after talking with Christoph and Gunther, the parable of the blind men and the elephant came to mind. And I think all of you have been exposed to that. It's a parable where blind men were asked to touch different parts of the elephant, and the one that touched the tail described the tail and said, "This is what the elephant is." And of course, this is the moral at the end of one of the versions of the poem. So I'm not suggesting that anyone here thinks they know what responsible global leadership is, but it did strike me as I sort of perused through the literature with the help of Christoph, that many studies come at this from kind of a stakeholder agent lens. Kind of we're looking at responsibility through that lens, others through a shareholder primacy lens. And in some cases, ne'er the twain do meet, right? It's almost like a belief system, okay? Then, of course, we have, I'm not going to go through all these, but, you know, there's all kinds of ways that people are trying to understand responsible in global leadership. We can kind of look at these at level of analysis. I'm up in the blue, okay? That's where I'm at, that's where I've been trained. But I think the purpose of this summit is to get us out of our color orientation up here to some degree. Think a little more broadly. In fact, to put a plug in at the Academy, Gunther and I and Joyce Osland have organized a PDW, a professional development workshop, where the whole point of it is to get people who are in talent management and sustainability and CSR and other areas to bring those lenses to bear on global leadership. So if you happen to be going down to Orlando after this, come to the PDW. And again, some of these are more oriented, and then even within the color scheme, sometimes, you know, there's a bias on which how we're looking at it within the color scheme. So as we go through the rest of the summit, maybe think about where you're at, think about where your biases are at, think about what kinds of ways could I learn more about this from people working in some of these other levels of analysis and perspectives. And what we probably need in the field is more integration of perspectives than just working with what we know best. Okay, I'm going to turn just a few minutes over to Gunther. This is how he and his colleagues have kind of framed this working definition, and rather than I butcher it, I'm going to let him defend himself.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Well, there are many people in the audience who are better qualified to offer a definition of what responsible global leadership is, but this is the working definition that my team, my doctoral students, and I have adopted, and that we have found useful in guiding our empirical work on the antecedents of responsible leader behavior, or responsible managerial behavior is actually a term that I prefer. The term leader has a connotation that is not always very helpful, especially in this context, and being German, I usually try to avoid the term leader. But anyway, so the definition that we have adopted is consistent with two major themes in the CSR literature, namely concerns about businesses' detrimental impacts on society and the goal of contributing to society, what Lord Hastings talked about earlier today. And accordingly, we distinguish between two different sets or types of responsible behaviors, what we call do no harm behavior and do good behavior. Now, do no harm behavior includes decisions and actions taken by managers to avoid harmful consequences for society, including ensuring product safety, helping to protect the environment, making sure that minorities are not being discriminated against, and so on. So this is consistent with everyday moral intuition, right? I mean, it seems intuitive to claim that managers who engage in these activities, such as ignoring safety regulations or cheating, right? Participating in a price-fixing scheme or ordering the dumping of waste into a river in order to save money are acting irresponsibly, and that managers who refrain from engaging in these activities are acting responsibly, right? So most people would agree with that. So this dimension has to be an integral part of any definition of responsible behavior, in my view. But the other category, do good behavior, is much less clear. Do good behavior includes decisions and actions aimed at enhancing societal welfare, such as engaging in philanthropic activities or community involvement projects. Again, you know, some of the things that Lord Hastings talked about earlier, or sponsoring to people who ride on their bike through North America, would probably also fall into this category. And including this dimension in a definition of responsible behavior is problematic for a number of reasons. One is that although the aims of these activities are laudable, in most cases, the business case for engaging in this type of responsible behavior is not always clear, as for instance, Tim Deviney, Don Siegel, and others have shown. In other words, engaging in this kind of responsible behavior might put executives in conflict with their economic responsibilities. Their responsibilities towards the shareholders, for instance. And the findings of a recent meta-analysis suggest that do good behavior doesn't seem to destroy shareholder value, but if the goal is return on investment, there are many other ways for companies to invest their money that delivers greater returns. Right? So that's, I'm not saying that companies should not engage in these activities, but making it a part of a definition of responsible behavior is very problematic, also because the absence of this behavior, the fact that a company or an executive does not engage in philanthropic activities, CSR activities, doesn't mean that this executive is behaving irresponsibly. Why should it, right? On the contrary, some people might argue that managers should actually refrain from engaging in these activities unless, you know, they enhance shareholder value. Again, that's not my personal opinion, but it shows that including this dimension in a definition of responsible behavior might be problematic. But despite these conceptual issues, we found it useful to distinguish between these two sets of socially responsible behaviors. For instance, Christoph Miska found in his doctoral dissertation that managers' propensity to engage in do good behavior and do no harm behavior is predicted by very different antecedent factors. So in our research, we are looking at both types of behaviors.
Thank you. Okay, we do know a few things. There are some, it's argued that there's some actual micro kind of behavioral competencies that influence responsible global decision making. But here's a few thoughts to ponder through, and I'm going through these very quick, and then we'll open it up for some of your thoughts about what we should think about the rest of the time. I've already talked, we've talked about the need for a construct refinement. What does it mean? If there's any doctoral students here, there's no trouble working on a dissertation because the field is so nascent and new. Okay? But, so what if, though, we believe that we should somehow merge these two perspectives? If so, how do we conceptualize, is it a snapshot in time? We take a snapshot of KPMG or Northeastern University, and it's like, okay, they're responsible. Or do we look at sort of how management teams are doing against corporate goals? Or is it systemic? Do we somehow look at some kind of an index level based on multiple measures of corporate responsibility? I don't know the answer to that. Or, I just went to Tim's presentation, loved it, it was great, but one of the, and I'm probably butchering this because I don't think he would like to take it this far, but how possible is this? He would say it's possible, I think, from listening to it. But also I think from what I took away from his presentation earlier is that you need to think this through carefully. And, it's not just a straightforward, aspirational, easy thing to do, which maybe sometimes we get into. And also, what would outcomes look like? How do we measure it? How do we operationalize responsible global leadership? Here's just, 3 options, but it's like in the general leadership literature, the dependent variables are everywhere. How do we how do we know it when we see it? Is it like art or pornography? We know it when we see it? Well, that's not good enough. Okay, and I'm just going to flip through these and let you read them, and we need to get to some. Who are the responsible global leaders? I think some of you could probably name some, but I really can't off the top of my head. But then again, I don't really work in that area. But I would love to know, who they are. Who are the expert examples? How can we integrate the two perspectives? And I'm sure this is going to be talked about later. So, discussion. Okay. And I've been asked to sort of facilitate it. How long do we have, Alan? 10 minutes. So, what are some of maybe your goals? What kind of clarification are you looking for over the next rest of the day and tomorrow? What thoughts come to your mind from this? This is very open-ended, meaning this is your turn to talk or to raise issues. Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And maybe both of them are valid, and how do they integrate? I know that Douglas McGregor, after he wrote Theory X and Theory Y and tried to be a university president or something like that, became very enamored with Theory X. He realized that reward systems, do have certain kinds of consequences. But that's a great point. And when do they move from figure to ground, right? In what kind of situations? Okay. As I was listening to Lord Hastings this morning, I enjoyed his discussion, but at each point I could think, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. Liking all the points he was making, but in this situation, what about this? And I think you're suggesting that context can change ethical or evaluations of what is responsible, what is not, sometimes based on national culture, sometimes on other things. There was another hand, I thought. Paul, okay. But what, same question, but what provoked it? Okay. Okay. Yes, in the back, in the far back, and then here. Yeah, that's great because great. I appreciate that. Now we're all going to run into that one, and they'll kick us out because they have these rules. Whether those rules are ethical about keeping us from sessions or not, I don't know. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're concerned about the do goods end of it to some degree, right? Because we also have sayings, no good deed goes unpunished, and help strikes again. We've all suffered when somebody's tried to help us with great intentions, right? And so, yeah, there was another hand. Was there a hand? Was I hallucinating? Okay. Mhm. 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 Yeah, so basically, some people would argue, right, that the people at the top management of McDonald's should like quit selling hamburgers and just serve salads, right? That would be the responsible thing if they were truly responsible. Well, yeah, well, yeah, okay, yeah. That's exactly right. Right, and so now it's not just national cultural differences, it's philosophical differences, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I've been. Oh, go ahead here, and then we'll go over this side. Mm-hmm. So I'm Apple Computer, and I say I pay lots of taxes. In fact, let me tell you how much taxes I pay. And I'm not going to say this right, but if you want it to change the law. Quit messing with me. I'm being very authentic and transparent. Well, I'm not telling you where I'm stand on that. But, one way to change things is change the law too. Now, I've been over on this side a whole bunch. There's people over here. Go ahead.
From German family firms, how do you define responsible leadership? And they said it's balancing stakeholder interests. It's not prioritizing, but it's balancing over time. So you cannot solve this issue. You have to prioritize at one point of time because at one moment you cannot solve the situation and you have to prioritize one, but that doesn't mean that at a second instance, at time two, you cannot go for a different stakeholder. So their issue is that responsibility as defined by German family firms, managers might be balancing over time.
So it's interesting, they've
Taken that systemic sort of process to some degree, but over time. They're not trying to do the snapshot, we're going to solve it all at once. Okay, interesting. Jenny, you had something?
At least with the business executives that we're engaging with, the level of either benefit or consequent in measurable terms to being responsible begins to be a discussion that can get their attention. And I think that field, we could explore that more about how to implement the measurement component to begin to, I think, raise the bar of real change rather than it just being a philosophical discussion.
really quickly.
All of you who are consultants in the room, how many of you sort of like agree with Jenny that would be a huge...
Well, how many are consultants? Okay,
So we got about, you're in the minority, but some of you have some compatriots there who share that need. Yeah, Tim.
I guess I want to come back to the leadership side of this. And the question is, well, what's really the fundamental aspect of the leader? And in essence, a lot of the things that we discuss about, when there were no conflicts, then leadership isn't an issue. Right? In other words, it simply becomes figuring out what the best of a mixture of things are. What leadership arises in a case in which there are losers. that there are hard decisions to make in which there have to be trade-offs, and that the individual who can make those decisions effectively is the individual who can convince the individuals who are sacrificing in that trade-off that sacrifice is worthwhile. And I think that one of my issues when you go back to having put my quote up there, one of the things they have that Big Mac and remain thin. No, you can't have that Big Mac and remain thin. That fundamentally there's a choice that has to be made.
Okay.
And that in leadership cases, if you look at the iconic leaders, they are individuals who make hard choices which involve trade-offs, but then convince the vast majority of the individuals, including that there's a game.
And if we were to go back to the Euclid quote, or, the summaries, right? Leaders, one could make the argument that what differentiates a leader from a manager is vision. And vision, and having a strong vision does that, right? Because it's like we're going this way, and other people may not want to go there. So this whole notion of vision has its, is not necessarily a win, yeah. Yeah.
It's easy to tell people we're going in a different direction and you don't have to go there. It's very hard to convince people that they actually have to go there, that there's something that goes above and beyond what they're really engaged with.
I have a great... Okay, we're just hitting nerves here now. We're just hitting... No, I'm just... Yeah. Oh, okay. Excellent. They say to end a party at its peak, right? So we're ending the discussion at its peak.